Hi, a very good early morning to all of you. In this episode on ergonomics, uh, a subject, a discipline that's core to industrial design or design in general, right? So let's try to understand the concept of ergonomics and its importance in design of products. Okay, ergonomics was also referred to as human factors consideration in design or while designing, which I think was renamed as user factors consideration in design because designers design products not only for just humans, right? We design products for humans, but we also design products for animals. For example, if you're designing a kennel or a cow shed, your user is the animal. If you're designing a pot for plants or an environment for plants, then your user is actually the plant. And if you're designing products for the elderly, then the elderly people, the older people, are your users. So instead of saying human factors consideration in design, it makes more sense to say user factors consideration in design. So probably dates back to the war times when scientists were designing the fighter aircrafts, right? Well, they observed that the pilot's performance in the lab was absolutely fine. He was able to reach the controls and he was able to see the displays very clearly. So everything was fine while the pilots were checking things in the lab environment where the fighter plane, was being designed and developed. But then they were in for a surprise when the pilots were actually using the fighter planes during the war environment. Because a war environment is a very tense environment, a very nervous, the user is likely to be very nervous. His attention is on the environment around him. So he's trying to see what's happening around him. And in the process, he need not necessarily have the time to take his attention to which control he is operating, right? Which means he is not really able to see the control before he can put his hand on it and operate it. So they realized that when the controls looked the same, it was difficult for the pilot to put his hands on a given control. And there is no time for him to look at a control, look at a display, and operate. So something more had to be done to ensure that this wasn't a problem. For example, the landing gears were given two wheels in the control itself. So when you put your hand there, you know that you don't have to see it. You know that you are trying to control the landing gear. Probably this is the origins of ergonomics, human factors consideration in design. Because the real working environment is unlike the lab environment where the research and development is happening. So we needed some expertise to give attention to the users in their working environment. Well, this applies not necessarily only to an airplane cockpit or automobile, driver's seat. It applies to almost all the contexts where a user is trying to use a product or an environment. It applies in all the contexts. The study of the user, an understanding of the user, can make all the differences in providing the three important factors that ergonomics, application of ergonomics would ensure, which is safety, one, Second is comfort. Third is psychological satisfaction, or we are categorizing this into three parts. Safety. That's the primary purpose of application of ergonomics. The products and the environment that we are designing should first be safe. Only then comfort makes sense. Only then psychological satisfaction makes sense. Right? Products have to be first safe to use. Ergonomics should ensure safety in the products and the environments that users are interacting with. And then the second thing it should ensure is comfort while using the products or while using the environments. And the third factor is psychological satisfaction. The person should be, or the user should be, satisfied in using the product or the environment. Right? As is the case with many disciplines, there are misunderstandings in ergonomics as a discipline too. So let's have a look at these visuals. Now normally, a common man is likely to make the mistake of seeing these visuals as ergonomic or non-ergonomic. For example, the first visual where the person is trying to bend down to the bottom of the cupboard would be considered as not ergonomic. Or a person trying to reach a switch which is very high, which is kept at a very high location. It would be considered as not ergonomic. Or a person sitting in a chair which is cushioned would be considered as being very comfortable. Well, now any of these statements is not completely wrong and it's not completely right either. It is always the context that defines or that indicates whether these statements are right or wrong. For example, in the first case where a person is trying to reach the bottom of the cupboard, if one considers that as non-ergonomic or not ergonomic, not the right thing to do, that would be ridiculous. There is nothing wrong in bending down to access a shelf or trying to reach up to access a shelf or an operation. Nothing wrong in it. It is always the context that defines. In this case, in a home or in an office environment, there's nothing wrong in performing an act like that. But if you are in an automobile, you're a driver, and you're driving a car, then trying to access a control which is away from you, that's not going to be safe for the person who is driving or for the people who are the passengers. So we cannot take a car environment and compare it to an office or a home desk environment. We have seen students often making this error of trying to keep things on a desk within the accessible, the reach of the person using it. This doesn't make it ergonomically safe or comfort. It may be something that gives a lot of satisfaction to the user, but definitely this is not something that will be safe for the user or comfortable for the user. We will try and see why. In a car-like environment, it is important that the driver's focus and attention is on the road and in the environment surrounding the car, so that he can take the necessary actions, right? So in which case, he cannot move his body down or left or right to access something, access the controls. He cannot move his attention too much away to see the displays that are giving a feedback about the car's condition. So then it becomes important that the design of the controls and the design of the displays are done in such a way that the driver's attention is not taken away. So this ensures the first factor, which is safety. Often, another misconception is that if the product being designed follows the contours of the human body, for example, a screwdriver having a handle that sort of follows the contour of a hand holding it, right? So the each and every finger and the thumb has its contour where it can go and snug fit. Or the back of a chair follows the contour of the spinal cord of the person. Often such things are considered to be ergonomic. So then you see a person who's got this chair, who's sitting in a chair that follows his spinal cord contour and follows the contour of the armrest, etc. Sort of a neat, snug fit for a person, because it appears to be then supporting his body. This can be a very tricky situation. Now, just because a chair is supporting my body all over doesn't make it necessarily a ergonomically safe and comfortable chair, because a chair like that would tire the person sitting on it within 15-20 minutes, because we cannot sit in the same posture, or we cannot retain ourselves, or we cannot remain in a certain posture for more than 10-15 minutes. Our body starts tiring. For example, you cannot hold your hand like this for more than 5-6 minutes. It would start tiring. Your hand would start paining. Your muscles will start paining, right? So, the misconception that a chair that follows the contour of the person would be a comfortable chair. That's wrong. So, a formal education and understanding of ergonomics as a subject is very important for the designer, because it is the starting point of emergence of design, and it is a core knowledge base for designers, because designers are all the time thinking about and talking about users. Okay. If we had to take an example of pots which we are designing for growing plants in it, what do we do normally? We have some pot at home, or we have a broken container, a stainless steel container that has, become, while cooking or whatever, a hole has happened in it. Now we do not want to throw it off, so we say, why not grow a plant in it, right? Many of us do this. There's nothing greatly wrong about it. It's something that's very common, putting a product to another use. But what we need to look at is whether the plant that we want to grow in, right, whether this container is appropriate for the plant that we want to grow in. Because not every plant needs or demands the same kind of an environment. Plants have their own requirements. Some plants need a lot of space for the roots to move around, and some plants don't need so much space for the root. Every plant has its own requirement in terms of humidity, temperature, land requirement, nutrition requirement, sunlight requirement, and the boundary with which it can grow. And every plant requires its own weed. Some plants grow well when they are next to a certain type of a tree. So we need to have a very good understanding of the plant that we want to grow before we put it into a certain container. So this is like understanding your user, their behavior, their characteristics before you can design for them. You also need to know, for example, how big this plant is going to grow. Likewise, if you are designing a kennel, a space, a living space for a puppy, you really need to know what breed it is, how big it's going to grow, what are the characteristics of that particular breed or dogs in general, right? What is the requirement of this dog as a puppy? And as it starts growing, how do the requirements change? Whether it's a male or a female dog. Whether it's going to have a litter little later. Whether it's a breed that's got a long coat or a short coat. The temperament of the dog. All these characteristics need to be understood before you would design a cage or a living space for a puppy. Normally one would have a question. Don't we all know what is ergonomically right for me or right for somebody? You'd be surprised. The truth is that, there are three aspects of ergonomics as we discussed earlier: safety, comfort, and psychological satisfaction. Out of these three, comfort and psychological satisfaction is something the user can understand and figure out the moment he tries the product. Suppose if we have a user who tries a chair for some time, or he looks at a chair for some time, he or she can figure out whether they would be happy with it, they would be satisfied using a product like this. They can use it for a while and figure out that they can use it for a day, for example, and they can figure out whether they were comfortable with it and they like it or not. But the first factor, which is safety, is something that user normally will not have any clue about, and he cannot figure out whether something is safe for him or her just by trying it for a few minutes, or even if you try it for a day. Because the safety that we are talking about are of two parts. One is short term. You immediately get to know whether some feature in a product is safe or not, whether a product has been designed safe or not. For example, tables with sharp corners. You can immediately know it's not a done thing. Sharp edges. When you rest your hand, it cuts in you. So one can figure out, okay, these features are not safe. But then many of the issues with the safety is that it has long-term implications. That is, the body is hurt not immediately, but 15-20 years later. The implications of a wrong posture, the implications of unacceptable, inappropriate amount of weight a person has lifted, just because he or she feels that they can lift it. The implications of all these kind of errors are not immediate. When you're young, the body doesn't show all these damages that it is going through. But later, in the later years of the user, it starts showing up. Your backbone starts hurting, your knee starts hurting, you end up suffering varicose vein problems, you end up suffering hearing problems, you end up suffering neck pain, you end up suffering numbness. Mouse users, right? Graphic designers and graphic artists suffer numbness in their ring finger. All this are long term. They don't happen immediately. So, poor understanding of the concept of safety, or lack of understanding of the concept of safety within the realm of ergonomics, has long-term implications. which, of course, a common man may not know, would not know, or is not expected to know. But it would be good to develop an awareness because the individual finally has to make a decision on what products are safe for him or her. So let's try to summarize this. When it comes to design intervention, ergonomics plays a very important role in ensuring the safety of the user, the comfort of the user, and the psychological satisfaction of the user while using the product. Let us touch upon the misconceptions too. Ergonomics is not about products following the contour and posture of a person using it. Ergonomics is not about ensuring that people don't bend or turn or stretch themselves. No, it's not about that. I hope this gives a basic insight and understanding into uh, ergonomics as a science uh, and application of the same by designers. Okay, it has to be always contextualized. This is just the definition part. Okay, so let's discuss the details in the forthcoming video. Do subscribe to keep with updates. Thank you. I hope this was useful to you.